Good afternoon, and thanks very much for your attendance at the report launch for assessing progress in implementing the Gender Equality Act 2020, brought to you by RMIT University. We have just about everyone joining us now, so we'll get underway. And the first thing I'd like to do today is introduce you to Professor Julie Kogan. Professor Kogan is Deputy Vice-Chancellor of the College of Business and Law and Vice President of RMIT University. And Julie today will provide the acknowledgement of country and also make some opening remarks. So, Julie, you have the floor.
Great, thank you so much, Karen. Thanks for the opportunity to be here and do the acknowledgement of country of today's event. Workplace gender equality and gender balance in leadership is so important to me personally, but also to the society we live in. And I couldn't be more pleased to see RMIT actively engaged in this leading piece of research, and also collaborating with organisations such as the Commission for Gender Equality in Public Sector and Department of Transport. A lot of our progress in gender equality has still got a long way to go, but our progress has come about because of trailblazers and people who speak up, create change and pave the way for others. So I wanted to share some of my reflections of an Indigenous woman, Barangaroo, in the acknowledgement of country today. She was an independent, wise woman of free spirit. Love her already. Barangaroo was married with 2 small children when country was invaded, and her family died of smallpox. And smallpox resulted in around about 80% of Indigenous people passing in the 1700s. And facing so much loss, Barangaroo saw the need to become an educator, working hard to share knowledge of Indigenous laws, stories, especially teaching women how to fish. And women were the main food providers, so that was a very important skill to learn. Barangaroo's second husband was Bennelong, and he was a Gadigal elder, and Governor Phillip ordered the capture of Bennelong and others so he could learn more about the local culture, the country and its resources, especially water and food. And during his incarceration, and probably out of necessity, Bennelong and Governor Phillip developed a relationship, and it became infused with genuine warmth. But as Bennelong became familiar with British customs and language, Barangaroo was required to be a frequent guest of the governor, and they even travelled to England to meet King George. But Barangaroo refused to integrate in any way. She wanted to stay true to herself and her beliefs. She refused to wear European clothes. When she was forced to attend to the soldiers and their wives with Bennelong, she went painted in white clay with a bone through her nose, and she made proud statements of her spirituality and culture. And she would not convert to Christianity either. So there were lots of times when Barangaroo was flogged for publicly stating her views, but she still continued to do it. And Barangaroo was a strong and courageous woman that inspires me. She was able to maintain her values and voice in an oppressed and violent environment where assimilation produced all of the rewards. And if it wasn't for women of the time like Barangaroo, so much of the Indigenous knowledge would have been lost. And I just thought it was a nice reminder for us to think about how we've had these amazing women in the past who have been trailblazers of the time, who've seen the importance of education and knowledge, and to disseminate it, because that's essentially what's happening today. So RMIT University acknowledges the people of the Woiwurrung and Boorong language groups of the Eastern Kulin Nations, on whose unceded lands we conduct the business of the university. I'd like to respectfully acknowledge their ancestors, past and present, and also pay my respect onto the lands wherever you're located today at this session. Thanks so much, Karen.
Lovely. Thanks for that, Julie, and what a interesting reflection on a remarkable person. So we'll now move to our first of our speakers for the rest of this session. And we'll hear from our three speakers consecutively, and at the end of that we'll open the session up for a question and answer engagement. But please, if you think of a question as you're listening to our speakers, use the Q&A function on the system to put the question forward. And at the end of the session at the Q&A, we'll try to get to, of course, as many questions that you pose as we can. So firstly, I would like to welcome Dr. Nikki Vincent, the Public Sector Gender Equality Commissioner. And Dr. Vincent was appointed as Victoria's first Public Sector Gender Equality Commissioner in September 2020. Dr. Vincent is responsible for overseeing the implementation of the Gender Equality Act and plays a key leadership role in promoting gender equality in the Victorian community and workplaces. Dr. Vincent has a wealth of experience in gender equality and organisational leadership. This includes serving as the South Australia Commissioner for Equal Opportunity from 2016 to 2020. Prior to that, Dr. Vincent held the position of CEO of the Leaders Institute of South Australia, as well as concurrent appointments as a member of the Remuneration Tribunal of South Australia. Dr. Vincent also has led major programs of academic research in previous roles, holds an appointment as an adjunct associate professor at University of South Australia's Business School, and has established and run two successful not-for-profit organisations. So I think we're in very good hands. So Commissioner, over to you.
Thanks, Karen. I'd also like to acknowledge that I'm coming to you from the lands of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation and pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging, and any other Aboriginal elders who are from other communities who are here today. Why do we need more women in male-dominated industries like transport? Well, there's some basics. It's going to address it's going to assist in addressing the skills shortages by drawing on the skills and capabilities of the whole potential labour force, which is 51. Women are 51% of the population. That it'll facilitate cultural and behavioural changes that make the sector better for everyone, or for the organisations better for everyone. It's also good for the bottom line. A recent global study found that organisations with more women in senior management teams are much higher performing across a range of financial and non-financial indicators than those with lower gender diversity. And as an aside, the latest piece of research that I've seen shows that nations with female heads of state had 40% fewer COVID deaths. It's pretty significant. So there are clear economic and social benefits from gender equality, but it's also just the right thing to do. As the inaugural Public Sector Gender Equality Commissioner in Victoria, and actually in Australia, it's the first in Australia, I'm responsible, as Karen said, for the Gender Equality Act, and this legislation applies to the broad Victorian public service, also the university sector and local government in Victoria. So about 300 organisations covering about 450,000 workers. The Gender Equality Act is the first legislation of its kind in Australia to recognise that people can experience gender inequality differently due to things like race, ethnicity, sexual orientation, age, disability and other aspects of our identity that might intersect with gender. All organisations under the Act must audit their workforces across 7 key indicators. They are the gender composition of their board and the gender composition at all levels of the organisation, looking at their recruitment and promotion practices, their access to leave and flexible work, things like the gender pay gap, gendered segregation in their organisation and sexual harassment, of course. They use the data that they collect from doing their audits to consult with their workforce and develop their gender equality action plans. And the data was submitted to me on December 1st last year. The gender equality action plans in the main were submitted to me on March 31st this year, and we're just finishing up our compliance checking of those plans. We are launching a baseline audit report and insights portal in late August, so you'll be able to have a look at the data that we've got from every organisation that's covered by the legislation at a sort of high level, and you'll also be able to have a look in our baseline audit report at how the data looks across different sectors under the organisations under the Act. All of that, so that transparency, we hope will drive change. We think it'll drive competition between organisations to be better. But organisations also have to make reasonable and material progress on each of the indicators in every 2-year period, and they must report to me again every 2 years. So for progress reports every 2 years. In addition to those obligations, they have to also undertake gender impact assessments on every program, policy or service that has a direct and significant impact on the public. So there's quite wide-ranging and having wide implications in terms of all of the obligations under the Act. I also have dispute resolution powers. I can look at problems of systemic gender equality in organisations that affect a class or group of employees in an organisation and help resolve those issues. The Act has teeth. It's not just the transparency, but if organisations fail to comply with the legislation, there are a lot of steps that I can take to help encourage them to comply. And if all else fails, I can go to VCAT to ask for an order directing the organisations to comply, which is very different to any other equality legislation in Australia that don't have much of that legislation doesn't have much teeth, and so this one is unique in the level of compliance powers that it allows me to have. But I think more importantly, the Gender Equality Act is a signal to the broader community about the fact that gender equality is no longer a nice to have, it is a must have, and this is the direction that Victoria is going in. So let's talk about gender inequality, because we'd like to think that everyone has an equal chance at getting the job they want. We believe in a fair go in Australia, but the barriers to women in the workforce start long before they begin applying for a job. And it starts with those stories we're told from childhood about gender roles, baby boys getting blue bedrooms with dinosaur mobiles, and later they get toy trucks and soldiers, and baby girls get pink bedrooms and fairy or unicorn mobiles, and later toy dolls and kitchens and household cleaning appliances. These gender stereotypes and norms have a big influence on the way that boys and girls see themselves and their futures, and how they think about who fulfills certain jobs and who takes on caring responsibilities. The world of work was designed by men for men, and men who had wives generally at home looking after the children, taking care of the house and making sure that they could just go to work and be that sort of ideal worker who didn't have to think about anything but the job, the paid job that they were doing outside of the home. That isn't the case anymore. And what we're trying to do now is almost squeeze women in to a system that wasn't designed for the lives that women and men in families lead these days. And we need to change that system itself. It's not a matter of fixing women. It's a matter of breaking the bias that is baked into the very walls of industries and workplaces. And I loved Liz Broderick, who was the former Sex Discrimination Commissioner's description of this as the sort of gender asbestos, that sort of built into the very walls and structures of organisations. One book that I've read recently called Invisible Women by Caroline Criado Perez. Actually, I've read it a couple of years ago and I've probably sold hundreds of copies because I promote it everywhere. But it gives strong examples of how the world was designed by men for men by default. Things like even today, crash test dummies are based on the 50th percentile male who is taller and heavier than the average woman and has a different anatomy, obviously. And even when female crash test dummies are used, they're actually actually just scaled down versions of male dummies and usually placed in passenger seats because, of course, women don't drive. And this means that cars are designed for men. And unfortunately, in an accident, a woman is 47% more likely to be seriously injured than a man in a car crash, 3 times more vulnerable to whiplash, and 17% more likely to die. And those statistics are recent. They're only from last year. In the construction sector, things like the size of bricks, when you think about it, men can pick them up easily, women have more trouble because the size of bricks were designed to fit a man's handspan. And the sacks of cement are a weight that can be readily carried around by a man, or at least a younger man. And had women made up the majority of brickies, then the weight of those sacks and the size of bricks would be designed around women. It's not random. It was designed for men. The same with PPE. You may have heard a lot about this personal protective equipment. It's designed for men's heads, this ideal man's head. And so what happens is a lot of PPE doesn't actually adequately protect women. And a lot of women attempt to reshape themselves to fit into the system designed by men for men. And we need to change that system itself. And as I said, break the bias towards male as a default. And if you're not sure about inequality and bias, then Invisible Women is a great read to highlight those issues. When it comes to recruitment, conscious and unconscious bias and stereotypes can have a big role in decisions, in influencing decisions. Women have to send many more job applications to receive the same number of interviews compared to equally qualified men. Unconscious bias is deeply ingrained. We all have it, and that's okay. But it's when we allow that bias to influence our decisions without us even being aware of it that it can result in unfair outcomes. And there's this brilliant study of Michael and Michelle. They're fictional characters who went for the role of a police chief. One had strong media experience in education. Let's say Michael, strong media experience in education, while Michelle had on the ground experience and street smarts. And when Michael had the media experience in education, it was seen as more important for the police chief to have media experience in education. And when they swapped the names on the CV, so it was Michelle that had the media experience in education, the panel, the experimental panel, said that it was much more important for on the ground experience and street smarts in this role. So even when the names of the candidates were swapped, the male candidate was chosen every time. And that panel really thought that they were appointing the right man for the job. But in actual fact, what they were doing is appointing the right job criteria for the man. Unconscious bias means that the right person for the job often looks like the man who was last in the job, especially in male-dominated industries and sectors. Harvard University's Project Implicit has free online unconscious bias tests that you can do in the comfort of your own home, in the privacy of your own home. You don't have to tell anyone. And there's one about gender and careers. And I'd encourage you to go and take those tests yourselves if you haven't already. I certainly have done it, and I found some quite shocking results as well. But the important thing is that you can do something about it once you know. So as I've indicated, the problem with a lack of women or a lack of men in any particular industry starts long before people get into the workplace. But we can begin to change this from anywhere, including in the workplace. We need to break down these harmful stereotypes, including stereotypes around caring responsibilities. Offering leave and flexibility for all employees can put employers ahead of the game. We've got to increase diversity in leadership. It's not that you can't be what you can't see. There are trailblazing women in every industry, but it's harder to be what you can't see if you don't have those trailblazing instincts and the incredible resilience to push through as a trailblazer. Invest in the pipeline of women coming into industry. Turning on the tap full blast when there's nothing in it won't help. We funded the research that you're going to hear about today. It's one of many research projects that we have funded, including a new round, which we'll be announcing very soon. I'm really excited about what the research found. It did find strong commitment from the Department of Transport and willingness to engage with the challenges. But despite this, the research found unconscious bias and traditional masculine cultures continue to create barriers for women. I'm sure Ida's going to talk about all of these barriers in detail, so I won't go over them here. Suffice to say that cultural change in male-dominated organisations, in male-dominated tech sectors, takes time. It requires a clear roadmap, a focus at all levels of the organisation, vigilance in monitoring and reporting, and it requires staying power to maintain the focus and do the hard yards. The Department of Transport is obviously not starting from zero. It's articulated commitment to gender equality and has a lot of great policies and processes already in place. And if it implements the research team's recommendations, these will help also drive the change that is needed both further and faster. So congratulations to all involved.
Well, thank you very much, Commissioner, for that presentation, a very engaging presentation and a wonderful way of bringing some very important legislation alive for our community. Next, I would like to go to introduce you to Miss Antoinette Batista, Executive Director, People and Culture Department of Transport. On the invitation, you may have been expecting Mr. Paul Eunice. He wasn't able to join us today, but we're very, very fortunate to have Antoinette with us today. Antoinette's career in HR is more than 20 years in the public sector. Currently, Antoinette is the Executive Director at the Department of Transport. Antoinette has extensive experience as a strategic leader. She has worked in public transport in government departments for the past 15 years. Antoinette has experience in leading strategic and operational people and culture functions and multidisciplinary teams spanning all functions of human resources. Antoinette has extensive experience in leading multiple large change programs arising from machinery of government changes, restructuring and culture change, and has extensive experience in leading organisational development initiatives and programs to drive engagement, positive workplace cultures and performance. So Antoinette, you have the floor.
Thank you. Thanks, Karen, so much. And hello, everyone. And thanks for the opportunity to join you today. On behalf of Paul, many apologies, but he was called to an urgent meeting with ministers. So I'm here today. So I'd also like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands in which we're live streaming on today. And for me in Glenroy, it's the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation. So I'd like to pay my respects to all the elders, past, present and emerging. So thanks, Nikki, because that was just such an inspiring, introduction. That was fantastic. And I think the Department of Transport would just so grateful but so lucky and blessed to have had this opportunity to partner with RMIT in this research project. So I'm really excited here today to talk about what transport continues to do to really achieve gender equality in our organisation. As Nikki was saying, we haven't started from scratch. We've done some fantastic work, but we've got a long way to go. And partnering with really having the opportunity to partner with RMIT validated some really great work that we've done, but also highlighted where we needed to really sharpen our focus. And we couldn't be any more grateful for that, for that wonderful, rich evidence that we actually needed. So as Nikki was saying, it's not just, it's not just the right thing to do to achieve gender equality. There's so many benefits, productivity, organisational performance, reputation, and just that ability to create an organisation that really reflects the community that you're actually serving. So Department of Transport traditionally is overrepresented by men, and if we think about what we're doing, if we think about the product that we're, and the services that we're providing to the communities, transport, then and you think about well, a lot of women actually use public transport, and they do have very different travel patterns to men. Then you really want a woman to be, or women to be actually helping in the design and planning of those of the products and services that we provide to the community who use it. So it makes logical sense to actually really go down this journey and ensuring that we have an organisation that reflects our community. So our Gender Equality Action Plan was informed. Sorry, who's is it? Nick? Sorry, Nick. Can you the first slide? Beautiful. Thank you. Thanks very much. So our first our Gender Equality Action Plan was actually informed by a number of things. People Matter survey, that's an annual survey. It really tests the climate of our organisation, and it really asks people to talk about, how their experience of the organisation on many fronts. We also, of course, conducted a workplace gender audit to really establish a baseline about where we're up to. And also, of course, the research that RMIT conducted, which involved a consultation process. So we actually ran workshops over 400 employees, including our leaders. And as I was saying, this is fantastic because this research really gives us the evidence and the information that we need to actually make a further difference. And really, we've used all of it. And can I just say, and we've actually, all the recommendations that you've made, we've actually used them to inform our Gender Equality Action Plan. So next slide, please, Nikki. Thank you. Thanks. So the research, as I was saying, while it told us the things that we needed to do, one of the things that we really got a lot out of was really validated some of the things that the department is doing right now and has been doing for quite a while, since about 2017, and so we know that we need to continue doing that. So that's fantastic. We've got a number of strategies in place. The Women in Transport strategy. So this is a strategy that really looks at, it's a transport portfolio wide strategy. So it goes beyond our organisation, and it looks at how do we actually increase women to transport, and also not just attracting women to transport, but once they are here, what career pathways they have. And so we've also got a target around increasing the number of women that are in senior positions. So we've got industry-wide targets, which is fantastic, and we've progressed. I think there's 28% of women in the industry. We're going for a 50%, of course, a way to go, but we started that in 2017. And also again, senior people in senior positions, we've got a way to go with those as well. I think in the department itself, it's about 38%. So 50% is our target. We've also got inclusion and diversity strategies around a transport personal safety strategy, and this is all around safety of women and young women, women and young girls, to actually their safety on the transport network. So, and that was in direct response to the increasing number of sexual harassment or sexual harassment incidences on our network. So we actually want to produce and provide a network that people actually feel safe, and the safer people feel, then the more they're likely to use the services. So there's some of that was fantastic to kind of get that validation, and we'll continue. Our Gender Equality Action Plan actually reflects those strategies, and we'll continue to do that. The other thing that the research actually told us is things that we needed to do to actually improve gender equality and help us achieve that and progress with that. So the next slide, please. Thank you. So here, one of the things that, it has really brought to light is the lack of accountability. And when we say that, I think what we've done is while leaders are actually committed to it, we actually haven't held them accountable for gender equality in the organisation. So that was, kind of, even though we've taken a transport portfolio wide view, it's really working with employees right across the organisation, but we actually haven't made leaders particularly accountable. Also, Nikki talked about this bias in recruitment and promotional opportunities. Absolutely. Can I say though, one of the most beautiful stories I've heard of late in transport was when we've just appointed our first woman chief engineer in transport, which is amazing. When she was interviewed, she was 38 weeks pregnant. And when she was offered the job, she was just about to give birth. And she talks about that story. And it's a great story because, one, we got the right person in the job, but it was just, really being open to those opportunities and looking for the right person. But having said that, we do have a long way to go with recruitment. And I agree, Nikki, those biases are so ingrained. And I think we've got a real job to unearth them and really make people aware of how it actually plays out in something like recruitment. We've got a big journey around culture culture change. So the research did pick that up, that in many ways, it is around challenging some of the behaviours and attitudes around gender equity. We do have particular groups in transport which are heavily overrepresented by men, and we've got a way to go, especially in the network design, transport design, transport services, in the areas like policy development, corporate areas. We're far more, we're far more even, but in those very technical areas, we've still got a way to go. And of course, women in transport, a portfolio-wide view, so the collective effort is exactly what we need. And so there was the research did show us that there is a real gap around, that while we've got a transport portfolio view of women, we actually didn't have anyone to drive that in our own organisation. So that's a huge gap that we're going to address in our plan. So the next slide, please. So as I was saying, the Gender Equality Action Plan, really fantastic piece of work, only being able to have been achieved by the evidence that sits behind it. But we have increased our accountability of people leaders, and we'll put them in key performance indicators in their performance plans. We have got a cultural change program around, especially around gender equity, but gender equality, sexual harassment, family violence, and it's around really those attitudes around sexual harassment, but also how do we have those conversations in the organisation, and then how do we actually help people come forth with those stories, and what do we do with it, rather than just throw another, a form to a person to fill out. So we've got a lot of work to do around changing attitudes, and just really being open to a different way of thinking around gender. Challenging biases around recruitment, I was just saying, so really introducing training for our hiring managers in particular, and also learning how to recruit on potential. So this is something else we really want to move. So rather than having, really working, trying to hire people that have got 100% of the skills, which is often men because they've usually got the technical experience, but really going on potential as well and changing some of that. Leveraging off industry-wide approaches. So how we've done women in transport, we want to do really take a whole of transport portfolio-wide view, because then I think that collective effort will really help make a difference across the transport industry. And also targets. I think, while personally I don't like them, but they actually work. And so having targets, we're going to introduce more targets, especially around those areas that are heavily or more represented by men in our organisation. We've also developed, next slide please, and that's the final slide. We've also developed a vision for our gender equality action plan that really is around a demonstration. We want DOT to demonstrate a culture of gender equality that's free from sexual harassment, everyday sexism and gender stereotypes, and develop or create and continue to build an organisation that is truly reflective of the community it serves. So just once again, I just wanted to say thank you so much for partnering with us and giving us the evidence and research to really help sharpen and strengthen our Gender Equality Action Plan. And I look forward to continuing to work with you. We know we've also made a commitment that we're going to evaluate our plan and we'd like to continue to work with RMIT to do that. So, yeah, so thank you.
Thanks for that, Antoinette. It has been a very productive relationship, and so we look forward to continuing that work. And thank you very much for being so open and transparent in the way that the Department of Transport has adopted this report. Our final speaker is Dr. Ida Galabagi. Ida is the founder and leader of the Gender Matters in Transport research theme at RMIT University and was also the lead investigator on this project. Ida's research focus is on gender equality in workplaces in transport and logistics industry. Ida has investigated the impact of embedded ideologies on women's careers in the sector. In collaboration with leading corporates, she studies the barriers to access and entry, retention and progression for women within the male-dominated sector of transport and logistics. And over to you, Ida, to tell us a bit more about the report.
Thanks very much, Karen. I'm very pleased to be here to officially launch the report of our project and share some of the findings and recommendations of our project with everyone here. I'm here today on behalf of this fantastic research team, and I'm very thankful of the contribution of everyone in the team. Next slide, please. And I would like to thank the Commission for Gender Equality in the Public Sector that gave us the opportunity and to do a case study research within the transport sector. And as Nikki mentioned, this research was part of the grants scheme that the Commission has had it in last year, 2021. And also, I would like to acknowledge the support from the Department of Transport and Major Transport Infrastructure Victoria as two organizations that agreed to work with us as the case studies and provided access to their executive team and staff. And I would like to express my gratitude to all those more than 50 people and research participants from these two organizations, the senior executives and the staff who joined us in our research interviews and focus groups and very generously and honestly shared their experiences and knowledge with us. Without all of these people, this research and report wouldn't be possible. Next slide, please. So the workplace gender inequality, as we talk about it, we know it's an enduring problem. And it's not limited to only one organization or only one sector. So we've got this problem in globally and widespread, and we talk about it. Women are still facing issues in even accessing to some of the occupations. The pay gap is still there, and women are still earning much less than men in the workplaces. Next slide, please. But what we should think about it and we should acknowledge is the challenges and barriers are much harder for women to get access in some of the male-dominated sectors that's been historically like that. This graph shows the picture in the Australian transport and logistics sector. As we can see, over the last 20 years, we've always had a steady composition of around 20% women in the workforce, in the entire workforce. And so that's very low and hasn't changed. But we should acknowledge that the picture in the public sector is much better. And we see, as an example, in the Department of Transport, we've got around 45–46% of the entire workforce are women, which is a fantastic progress in this space. In terms of the leadership roles, there are very few women in the leadership roles in the transport sector. Again, the picture in the public sector is much better than looks more promising than the private sector. And I think we need to focus on that and see how we can translate and transfer that in the progress in the public sector to the private sector. One of the specifics of this sector that Nikki and Anthony talk about it is, you know, in the mind of the not even just the workforce, but within the society, whoever needs to work into the transport sector needs to have strong muscles, and that makes it much harder for women to work even in other occupations in the sector that doesn't have any strong muscles. The picture of the ideal worker in this sector is a white male, 6 foot man with very strong muscles. And changing that mindset takes time and effort. And that's why we are very interested in studying these type of male-dominated sectors, such as transport, and see how we can make a progress. Next slide, please. So in this study, we had an organizational focus. We didn't want to see how the individuals can make change or what societies should do to make a change. We wanted to see what organizations need to do, what we can change within the organization to achieve those goals and increase the women participation in the sector and in the organization. As a case study approach, we studied all the policies and strategies within the organizations to find the gaps and the strength in there and see what are the challenges that hinders the progress in the in achieving the gender equality. What are the potential facilitators and opportunities that we can focus on those ones and achieve the goals of the organization. And at the end, we wanted to provide some recommendations to inform the future policy and practice. Next slide, please. The output of this project is this report, which I encourage everyone to go to our website. I think the link is will be available in the chat. So go to our website and download this report. And so today I only briefly talk about the findings of the research. And next slide, please. So in terms of the findings in this research, I can tell that no change can happen. We can't have any change happens without the strong commitment and accountability from the leadership team. And found that in the Department of Transport, you know, from the top leadership team, the secretary and the ministerial office, how committed they are to see the real change in the sector and within the organization as well. However, what we found was that, you know, those commitments hadn't been cascaded down effectively to all the level of the management, and all the comprehensive policies that were in place, they were subject to ineffective implementation because the organization's cultures, structures, and the processes were actually hindering the progress and achieving those aim of those policies. As I mentioned before, the focus of this study was on the organization. So one of our findings actually shows that, you know, we need to shift the focus from women to changing the structures and systems and processes. And our female participants, they were telling us that they are frustrated of being invited to some trainings, some irrelevant trainings that even their male counterparts, they were not invited to. So we need to change the debates and conversations into the structures, systems, and processes. Next, please. In our report, we've provided 5 sets of recommendations. The first one is the changing the culture in the organization, and I go through that later on. The second one was to We need to have the focus on systematic change in changing the processes and structures to combat that gender biases that happens in the recruitments. Third recommendations are about targets and KPIs. What targets we should, the organization needs to put, and how to achieve those targets. Then the flexible and part-time work. While we know that women are the most group, in the doing the part-time work. So how we can make sure that they are not undervalued and they, we having them to be able to thrive even working part-time. And then the fifth set of recommendations are about the intersectionalities. Next, please. The first recommendation, which is about changing culture, recommends to initiate resource and support, enough support and enough funding to be able to embed the workplace gender equality mindset. The gender equality needs to be prioritized. It should be in the day-to-day conversations within the leadership, and those leaders needs to talk with all of their direct reports. It needs to make sure that that commitment is cascaded down effectively to all the managers, and nothing is left to the discretion of those managers. Those conversations shouldn't be limited to some ad hoc events. For example, International Women's Day, it's we all talk about this, and we've got all the webinars, seminars, and conversations, but when that's gone, no one else is talking within the organization about the gender equality. So we need to have that constant messaging in the organization, and training opportunities for all the managers who are responsible for recruitments. They need to know all of those culture change and how that can impact, and they need to know about the benefits of the gender equal workplaces, not just for the workplace, but also in terms of the operations and the productivity of the organization. Then the training, mandatory training workshops to train the staff about the conscious and unconscious biases, the benevolent and hostile sexism and stereotypes in workplaces. I remember in the focus groups, our female participants, they talk about going to some workshops which were organized externally but advertised within the department. And sadly, there were very few men in those workshops. And although at the end of it, they admitted that it was a very useful workshop, which helped them to understand the consequences of their decisions and behaviors, that they might disadvantage their female colleagues much better. But because it's not mandatory, not many men go attend those webinars. So we really need to make it mandatory for everyone. Next, please. Our second recommendation is to remove the biases in recruitment, promotion, and role assignments by building the structures and implement the resources and systems. We need to make sure that the systems are set right. We should not leave the final decisions as and everything into the discretion of the recruitment managers. The processes needs to be revisited. The regular audit and monitoring of the job descriptions and advertisements are vital stages in this. We need to check all the job descriptions. Are they inclusive enough? Are they do we really need to have that qualifications, especially in those male-dominated divisions that engineering and operationals? If that one is really that qualification is really needed. We know that the recruitment processes are always based on the fairness and meritocracy, but we need to consider the historical labor market disadvantages that women always had in this sector, and consider that and moderate those meritocracy considerations. The KPIs are a great tool in terms of making sure that the managers are working toward a KPI to build those structures and achieve a more gender balance in their teams. Next, please. The third recommendation was about the setting targets and clear means of achieving them. Targets needs to be realistic and achievable, and it should be across all divisions. Our workforce analysis indicated that even within Department of Transport, we see that the divisions are kind of segregated. Some divisions, they've got more than 50% women, but others which are more like engineering, design and planning, they may even have 20% women participation. So we need to make sure that targets are for each of those divisions. And to effectively implement those targets, we need to link it to the manager's KPIs. Because if it's not linked to their KPIs, they do not plan to work toward it. And one of our interviews participants mentioned that their KPIs are very operational and they think about them and they achieve those KPIs. But gender equality or recruiting more women in their divisions is not part of their KPIs. So we really need to set that KPIs into the managers' roles. And very regularly monitor those targets and see how the division is actually progressing in achieving those targets. It shouldn't be only once at the end of the year. We should do it more frequently, like every 3 months or every 6 months. Our fourth recommendation, next please, is about to increase the awareness of the value of flexible work arrangement, not just for women, but for men as well. Our participants were talking about how the stigma of part-time working and the flexible work arrangements are still around in the cultures of the teams, and sometimes women they are quite hesitant to start working part-time or to say that they are working flexibly. So to combat that stigma, we really need to actively promote that flexible work arrangements for men. Also, we should put the monitoring processes in place to monitor the part-time employees' role allocations to make sure that they are not undermined and undervalued because they are working part-time. The other suggested action in this area is job sharing. Job sharing is a very great tool especially in the senior management roles, where women, they would like to work part-time, but they would like to become a leader and they've got the skills and capacities to become a leader, but they don't want to work full-time. So job sharing provides that opportunity for women to thrive in the organization and take more responsibility in the organization. Next, please. So our last recommendation is about increasing the awareness of and responsiveness to intersectionality characteristics. One of the strengths of the Gender Equality Act is consideration of the intersectionality characteristics. So the industry is still in its infancy stages in terms of the intersectionality characteristics. Our recommendation and set of actions in this focus is to start collecting data to see how the workforce look like in terms of the intersectionality characteristics and actively lead the conversations on this within the executive team. What we should not forget and what we should not ignore is that the experiences of white, middle-class, educated women are very much different from experiences of, for example, migrant women or Indigenous and First Nation women or women with disability. So we need to make sure that we are able to consider all of those intersectionality characteristics and provide an inclusive workplace for everyone. So I think I'm mindful of time. I'm finishing my talk here. I would like to encourage everyone, so please go to our website and download the report, read the report and contact me. And if you would like to know how we can how you can utilize those recommendations within your organizations, I'm more than happy to be in touch with you. And also, if you want to work toward your gender equality action plans and the strategies that you want to have, we would like to collaborate more with you and help you to achieve your goals in achieving a gender equal workplace. Thanks very much. Over to you, Karen.
Thank you, Ida, for that very comprehensive summary of the report. Look, we have a number of questions, and we'll get to as many as we can in the next few moments. There's one group of questions that really goes to, this is wonderful practices for the public sector. How do we translate these lessons into the private sector? So, Commissioner, I'll ask you to respond to that first, and then Antoinette second.
Sure. So the Workplace Gender Equality Agency, which implements the Workplace Gender Equality Act, it is legislation at the federal level that covers all organisations in the private sector across Australia with 100 or more employees. So they have to report data to the Workplace Gender Equality Agency, and the Act and the agency has just been reviewed. We've made a submission to strengthen the work that the Act can do and that the agency can do, and we work very closely with the Workplace Gender Equality Agency to share data and knowledge and so forth. The second way is by role modelling. And so what we're doing here is focusing on the public sector first, but as I said, there is an indication of this is the way that things are going. This is, you know, gender equality isn't just a nice to have, it's a must have. And so public sector should go first, it's using public money, it should role model better practice for everyone, and being transparent and reporting on that and showing how the Act can drive reasonable material progress, we think is important. Also within the Act, there are two ways that we can influence the private sector directly, and that is through funding guidelines and procurement guidelines. And the government in Victoria is already doing some of that with the building equality policy, where it requires any contracts over 20 million to actually, those contractors to actually undertake gender impact assessments, workplace gender equality audits and gender equality action plans and gender impact assessments. So there are lots of prongs. We're not leaving the private sector out. We've also had inquiries from private sector organisations that want to lead the pack, that want to report to us voluntarily, and we'll certainly look towards that in future years.
Thank you very much, Commissioner. Antoinette, there's a particular question there for you around how change can go into the private sector element of the transport sector.
Yeah, fantastic. So what I can say is we are through partnership, through partnering. So we will and we do partner with private industry. Examples of that, the Women in Transport program I was talking to you about, that actually partners private industry as well. So we run mentoring programs for women, you know, have been doing for a number of years. Culturally, I think there's in some parts of industry, we're doing quite a bit of work, deep work in terms of culture change. So we're not leaving them out, but we do partner with them when we can. Absolutely. And the other thing is we've also got a steering committee, an industry-wide steering committee, and there's participation in that as well. So definitely through partnering and raising awareness and collective opportunity, I think we can really make a difference.
Fabulous, thank you for that. Commissioner, there's a particular question here for you from Dr. Janine Hook, and I think we'll need to make this possibly the last one that we can respond to. And that's from, yes, Janine Hook. Will the community of practice model continue to help statewide organisations to share stories of success towards gender equality and intersectional inclusion? The question and the statement is it's particularly helpful for regional communities.
Yeah, absolutely. And we're particularly interested in supporting the community of practice models and even strengthening those, particularly in relation to now the gender impact assessments that organisations are moving to do. We're just standing up a team of 4 currently to put more focus on that. And because we're a small organisation, there are currently 17 of us, we have to use the communities of practice to work with them to drive the change that we want to see happening. So very much want to support that.
Thanks very much, Commissioner. Look, we'll need to wrap it up there, and shortly I'll hand over to Professor Victor Kakara to make some closing remarks. Just quickly, for those of you who have posted mechanical questions around the operation of the Act, we'll pass those on to the Commission and ask them for a response. For those of you whom we can identify from your questions, we'll get back to you with some further responses. But please may I introduce you now to Professor Victor Kakara. Victor, we can't hear you, my friend. Generally, we like that. You found us again.
This happens to me all the time. So I'll say this again. Thanks a lot, Karen. And with the 1 minute that Ravi has given me, I'm going to say thank you, thank you, thank you, and thank you. Thank you to the Commission for funding our research and supporting us through the research. And thank you to the DOT, including the MTIA, who is part of the broader DOT, for so generously contributing to IDA's and her team's research. And I must say that apart from just funding the research and supporting the research, you gave us, so that's the Commission and the DOT, you gave us the freedom to explore independently and freely. And to any research team, that is most important. We were able to explore freely, independently, and that's the room that you gave us, which we really appreciate. The next thanks is to the research team. Ida did a fantastic job in leading this team, and I think it's very good to see the outcomes, the findings of the research being so immediately adopted, appreciated, and implemented. And we hope that we shall continue to work with you, that's the DOT, the Commission, and other stakeholders in industry to support our research and drive this important area of research. Finally, I'd like to thank the audience. Without you, obviously, we wouldn't have such a successful event. Thank you for attending, and thank you for the questions that you've asked and participating. We look forward to seeing you again next time. And please keep supporting our research. And I think we will do great things going forward here at RMIT. We always appreciate it, your participation and support. Thank you very much. Thanks, everyone, and goodbye for now.
Thank you.